Hello. Let me start sharing my screen so we can have a look at my little slides. But in the meantime, I'm glad to see that a lot of people are doing well today. I'd be really interested to know where everyone's come from today, and also if you've heard of Safe in Our World before, because I can give a little bit of background about the charity, if that would be helpful for anyone in the audience. But let me... Oh, someone from Cyprus. I grew up in Cyprus until I was about 13, actually. Let me get my screen all shared for you. Okay, cool. Here we go. So I am talking to you all today about advocating for yourself at work. This is a topic that is especially important to women and people from other marginalized backgrounds. As I'm sure you can imagine, it can be really difficult for us to advocate for ourselves. I can see that a few people have already heard of Safe in Our World before, but a couple of people have said that they'd like to learn a little bit more. So what I'll do is I'll give a real quick explanation of the charity before I jump into introducing myself. But Safe in Our World is a mental health charity specifically dedicated to the video games industry and wider community. So that means that about half of our work is industry focused. That's the side that I'm all look after. We have a free program where we work with companies all across the global industry to basically help implement better mental health and wellbeing practices, which I'm sure I don't need to tell you is very important in this sector. And then the other half of what we do is really focused on the community. So a lot of that is about destigmatizing mental health, but also supporting with some of the specific issues that we see in video games, like, toxicity and building resilience, setting boundaries, all that kind of stuff. I will pop our website in the chat as well. It's just safeinourworld.org. But without further ado, I will get into introducing myself. My name is Sky. I'm the Partnerships and Training Manager at Safe in Our World. So as I said, that means that I run our Level Up Mental Health program, and I'm focused a little bit more on our industry initiatives. I'll pop a little link in chat as well for the Level Up program specifically. So if you are working at a games industry company already, you can go there to learn a little bit more about what I do and what that offers. But I have been with Safe in Our World for almost 3 years now. Actually, it'll be 3 years next month, which is pretty close to how long Safe in Our World's been around, because we're about 5 years old as a charity. So I've been here for a minute. Previously, my professional background has always been the giant pencil. Sorry, that made me laugh. That was at the Derwent Pencil Museum in a place called Keswick in the UK. And if you are anywhere near it, I would really recommend it. Pencil Museum doesn't sound like it will be interesting, but it really was. Anyway, my professional background has always been in HR and kind of learning and development and that kind of thing. Previously, I've worked in various HR and management roles in Odeon Cinemas in the UK, AMC Theatres in the US, and also AMC Cinemas in Saudi Arabia. And briefly before joining Safe in Our World, I did a little bit of government work. I'm also studying a master's in business administration part-time, focusing on leadership and people management. But all of that to say, I have a big interest in leadership, in management, in looking after employees. We spend so much of our life at work that it really matters that we're looked after. It shouldn't be something that we spend such a significant portion of our lives doing while also hating it. I have noticed a lot of issues in how leadership is addressed across a whole bunch of industries, even from my first supervisor role when I worked in a coffee shop. I recognized a lot of the kind of glaring issues we see in leadership, crucially around compassion and flexibility, or lack thereof. I can see a lot of love for stationery items in the chat, and that's making me very, very happy. And as you can see on the slide there, important information about me. I have 2 cats and a tortoise. You can see Pip in there, or Pip. She's 13. We've got Zuko, who is my demon baby, who's 3 years old. And I also have a Herman's tortoise named Geordie, who's about 5. But yeah, anyway, that's a little bit about me. We're going to move on now to kind of the bulk of the presentation around advocating for ourselves. So we'll start with a few statistics. I think that statistics do play a really important role in getting the point across. I'm kind of always in two minds about using them because on the one hand, these are very personal, very emotive issues, and you don't want to kind of boil them down to a number. But on the other hand, I also do feel like it displays the kind of breadth of the issue pretty well. These are some stats from a UKG survey and a Forbes article that are startling, but maybe not all that surprising. It found that 80% of surveyed workers feel that they don't, or believe that they don't feel heard at work. And 47% say that underrepresented voices are undervalued by employers. I think as marginalized people, we're pretty used to not being heard. We're pretty used to being afraid to speak up due to repercussions. And we tend to try and mold ourselves to fit others rather than actually asking anyone to make space for our own needs. We've got a little poll up at the moment that asks how often you feel unable to speak up at work. So if you are comfortable answering that, I think we can get a little bit of an idea for how this issue impacts the group that are here today. But we'll start by having a little look at some of the reasons why people don't feel super confident speaking up. And I think we'll have another little poll a bit later that asks for your thoughts on the matter as well, because the list that I'm showing you here on the slide is by no means exhaustive. We'll start with futility. Sadly, this one does often come from poor past experiences, but essentially it's this often learned response that people don't see the point in speaking up because they don't think that they're going to be listened to. And, you know, like I said, that's probably because they weren't listened to in the past. But it kind of puts you into this box or this restrictive way of thinking that why should I do it now? Because nothing's going to be different. And I won't be listened to, so there's no point in even trying, essentially. Another reason that we see come up quite a lot is around the status quo or the fear of breaking the status quo or going against it. This one I've actually noticed is quite particularly prevalent in the games industry, that a lot of people are kind of afraid of trying to rock the boat because of how that's perceived, like being perceived as being annoying or inconvenient or like a troublemaker, quote unquote. And a lot of people think, you know, we do it this way because this is how it's always been, or this is just how we do things and we don't need to question that. And I think a lot of people in leadership roles can respond pretty negatively to having their processes being questioned, as in like it becomes this sort of ego issue almost. So yeah, I think that's something that it's important to be aware of. And that a lot of the work that we do as a charity around supporting workplace wellbeing and leadership is geared toward instilling leaders with that quality of like being open to change and being flexible, like I said on the previous slide, is something that I'm very interested in looking at. But I think, honestly, one of the most common comments I get when I talk about like support, accommodations, preferred ways of working is that people just don't know what to ask for because they have never been accommodated for before. I myself am late diagnosed with autism and ADHD, so I have spent a lot of my life just putting up with how stuff is, thinking that I'm the problem and I need to change and just like deal with the situation, rather than actually understanding that there are things that I can ask for and ways that I can work that will actually help me and that are really actually not that hard for people to do and implement. I can see in the chat, well, I can see from the poll that quite a lot of people have said that they sometimes and often feel that it's difficult to speak up. And there are some people in the chat agreeing with, the label of being a troublemaker. And indeed that label can kind of follow you around through the kind of word of mouth. And someone said that for neurodivergent folks, not knowing what to ask for often comes from never having had accommodations before. And yeah, like I said, that comes up so often, that just, if you kind of tell your employer, I've got X condition, is there anything that you can do for me? They'll say, well, what do you want? And you will be, it's almost like you have every single option in the entire world in front of you, and you don't know what's going to work and what's not going to work because you've never had the opportunity to try. So it can actually be really helpful to be sort of offered a little menu of things, as it were, or kind of be able to actually have the time to reflect on that and see what works for you. I think, someone here said, I've never had another job, so I don't know what to expect at my workplace. Yeah, if you haven't had the experience as well, like of the different experiences of what different places can do. And also if you're going in this industry, we have really a large disparity in the size of the company. If you're going from a very small company to a very big company, or vice versa, like what they're able to do changes a lot, right? Like their bandwidth, the possibilities, the tools at their disposal for accommodations will change a lot. Okay. I am absolutely loving all of the contributions in the chat, and I'll definitely be taking a little time to read through these after the fact. But thank you all so much for just being really open and sharing your own experiences. I think that's often like why these sessions are so valuable, is not necessarily what I'm saying, although hopefully it is helpful, but it's about, being able to hear from other people and get that perspective that is outside of your like sphere of influence, realm of understanding, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, let me take a minute now to show you my Human Handbook. So I'm Sky. This is pretty much everything you need to know about working with me in a piece of paper. This is a resource that Safe in Our World developed as part of our self-advocacy speaking training, which was delivered live in kind of late 2023, early 2024, but it is still available to complete online completely for free. And you will get a template to build out your own Human Handbook. I'll drop the link for that in the chat as well. Just grab it. There we go. So one of the reasons why I thought it would be especially useful to highlight my own Human Handbook is to kind of, again, give you an example of what it can look like to, what it looks like for me to understand my needs, so that hopefully that gives you a little bit of inspiration when it comes to kind of understanding your own needs, I guess. So we've got a few different sections here. Firstly, we've got a section where I just kind of introduce who I am, talk about the things that I really like talking about, so you can get a feel for who I am. But then we've also got right up the front there, my communication preferences. This is something that is really important to me personally, because I can get very easily overwhelmed or lose track of things if they're not kind of communicated to me properly. So you can see there that I've said that you're always best to email me if you don't want me to forget about it or lose it. I'm very prone to opening a message on LinkedIn or on Discord or whatever, thinking, wow, I should really reply to that. And then it's a week later and I haven't done it. But then also, if you do just want like something not urgent, I'm very happy using Discord and things like that for work purposes. I know that a lot of people who have filled out similar handbooks are not okay with that, and that's fine, but it's good to let someone know if they're going to be working with you. It also said there, please don't call me out of the blue. I'm pretty sure I'm not alone on that one, but nothing gives me anxiety like someone randomly calling me for no reason, or someone just sending me the message hello and then they start typing for absolutely ages. Which I've put on there specifically as well, because as someone who has a couple of different anxiety-related diagnoses, that really stresses me out. My mind will just start racing with all of the possible reasons why I could be about to get fired, or I could be in trouble, or I've done something wrong, or someone's angry at me. So I much prefer, even if you feel like it's like rude or like it's cutting straight to the point without any small talk. I much prefer if you want to ask me something, just ask me. Don't start with the like, hey, first with no context. So anyway, I've called that out specifically because that means a lot to me. I've also put in there my learning styles. So if you're trying to teach me something, I really enjoy looking at a big old document. I love reading a massive long email. I'm totally fine with being provided with some pretty dense information and just working through it at my own pace. I do not deal well with learning from like an auditory perspective. Like I don't do very well with learning from podcasts and stuff like that. And even with videos, I tend to always have captions because if I'm reading it, it just goes in better. Or I take a lot of notes during meetings as well, because having it written down by hand just helps it go in. And I also like to do things. I've also put in there specifically that I tend to ask a lot of questions when I'm learning, especially why questions. This is something that has caused me so much grief in previous workplaces because a lot of people, when you ask why you're doing something a certain way, they perceive that as something that's rude or confrontational. But it's something that I really value in terms of having context for what I'm doing. And you know, I learn better when I can see the bigger picture. So I've kind of put in there I'm probably going to ask you why, but I'm not doing it to be rude. I'm doing it to aid in my understanding and to support the fact that I value context, both as kind of my learning style, but also probably an autistic thing. Anyway, we've got a few bits on there that I won't dive into loads of detail on, but things that you might need to know about working with me to get the most out of me at meetings and events, or if you want to give me feedback. These are some really important things that come up pretty often in work situations, especially the meetings and events thing. So I think it's a really important thing to communicate to people because I want to be able to perform my best when I'm talking to someone. So it's good to be able to give them that opportunity. You know, like it says on there, I don't drink, so I prefer to avoid alcohol-centered events. So if you're inviting me to, you know, a bar or a nightclub at Develop or something, I'm probably going to be really uncomfortable and stressed out, and I'm not going to be able to have a good conversation with you at that point. So maybe consider meeting with me somewhere else, for example. But yeah, that's the Human Handbook. That is the kind of core of what we are trying to do with our self-advocacy speaking training. It's about understanding yourself and communicating for yourself. That being said, we're all very different. This is a screenshot from a poll that we did, or like a question that we asked during speaking training, that just asked people, how do you feel when you read and respond to emails? Now, I think the disparity in the responses here illustrates perfectly my point here. I just said I love an email. I love writing long emails. I really pride myself on emails. I know that might be like the saddest thing anyone's ever said, but I'm really proud of the emails that I write. But the number one response here to how people feel when they get emails is overwhelmed, which is obviously completely different to how I feel. But then almost as many people responded that they feel relaxed. Almost as many people responded that they feel stressed versus those that feel calm. There are a lot of different emotions there in how people react to things. So being able to recognize how people feel differently is absolutely vital for being able to get the most out of them and for you to be an effective communicator for yourself, right? A lot of companies will have a process put in place that the person who designed the process, feels is super easy and accessible, but it's super easy and accessible for them, the person who made it, not for necessarily everyone who's going to have to be following that process. And that's, you know, what often happens when we get stuck in these routines and you get into the whole, like, this is how it's always been, where because it works for that one person, they feel like they've done a really good job and therefore they won't hear otherwise. They're not interested in seeing how other people feel or like understanding that and having that empathy. Now, obviously, this isn't to say that everything that you do in terms of communication or your work tasks or everything has to get super complicated. You don't have to change the way that you do things for every single person, but it's important to be mindful of how your communication might be received. And then, if possible and where possible, you can then adapt your approach. So, I mean, one of the things that I've done and I've always advocated for in all of my past workplaces is we'll do face-to-face meetings, we'll do calls and things like that, but someone's always going to take notes and do a follow-up email for everyone. Oftentimes that's me because I like doing it. And again, like I said, I'm always making notes anyway because that's how it helps it go in for me. But whoever that is, it's nice to have it both as a kind of conversation or an audio transmission of information, but then you'll have that follow-up. So you'll kind of be hitting two bases of how people might like to learn. There might be other ways that people prefer to do that. So rather than a big summary email, sometimes it will just be like bullet points in like Discord or Slack or something like that. It can look different for different teams, and that's something that a lot of that has to do with like who you are and what your human handbook looks like. But it isn't a significant amount of effort to add in those couple of extra methods of getting the information across, basically. So cool. I'm going to take just 1 second to read some of the comments that I've seen in the chat, because looking at them very briefly, there's some really good stuff here. Someone's asked for any tips on how to create a smooth working dynamic where multiple individuals have needs that go against each other, e.g. one individual needs to stim and one is easily overstimulated. I think for that one, probably not like the most useful or straightforward answer, because it really does depend on the situation and on the person. But it might be about having a conversation between those individuals or between the team, and identifying, you know, what can be done and what can't be done. Maybe it's a case that if that person is getting overstimulated, there's like a quiet area that they can break away to if they need to, or like a different meeting room that can be used depending on your office layout. Or it could be, you know, maybe the type of stimming or something that person does. Like I know that a lot of people, depending on the different type of like fidget that they're using, some of them are quite loud, some of them are less loud. So it could be a case of finding a compromise in that regard. For that question, I'd also recommend the training that I linked earlier, the self-advocacy speaking training, because that does look very specifically at that kind of, it dives into basically everything that I'm saying in a lot more detail, and looks at some of the specific issues that arise in terms of like empathizing with other people when you have differing points of view or differing needs, and how you can express your needs without it becoming an argument or a miscommunication, basically. Someone else said that it's very difficult to avoid alcohol-focused events, and they were so frustrated at GDC. Yeah, I agree. I think that it is really, really difficult. It's something that is so steeped in our industry, and something that it's always really nice to see when people are doing something different. You know, like people will have not only an event that has non-alcoholic options, but an event that's just focused around something completely different. Like I've seen some places do like an ice cream mixer. We, Safe No World, last year at Develop Brighton did a tea mixology workshop as our own mixer. So there are a lot of alternative options that doesn't take the like fun out of it. And I think the more that we can publicly advocate for that kind of thing, the more that ultimately folks will start to listen. But it is currently something that's pretty frustrating. Someone else said that they find follow-up, a couple of other people said that they find notes and follow-up emails super helpful. I think I think generally a lot of people find that quite helpful because it just has that backup so you don't forget stuff. Even if like you're pretty good at remembering, there might just be like a lot of different random action points or things that are like assigned to a lot of different people that can be really difficult. Someone said an ice cream mixer sounds like a dream. Yeah, tell me about it. Oh, the tea event. Yeah, it's something that we would love to do more in the future. We had like a little station where people were actually like blending and brewing like really interesting weird tea combinations in front of us. So it was like fun and cool and engaging, and not a single person was like, wow, there's no alcohol here, this is terrible. Anyway, I digress. Thank you all again so much for all of your comments, and there's some really good conversation going on here. Now, we've just looked at a whole bunch of information about how I prefer to communicate, about how other people might prefer to communicate. You all have shared some really cool stuff about how you prefer to communicate. Now, we'll have a look at self-advocacy speaking specifically, which is the again, the training that we developed to deal with this specifically, to help people advocate for themselves, but also to help them communicate with greater empathy for other people and what other people's needs might be. Now, the purpose of self-advocacy speaking is not to teach you a new language, but it's to reconnect you with things that you already know, but that it can be really easy to fall by the wayside when you're swept up in work, when you're really busy. It can be very easy to slip into like, you know, saying kind of confrontational or accusatory things like, you always do this and it's annoying to me, which can cause, you know, a lot of those kind of workplace issues and like that friction that we see around asking for accommodations and asking for, you know, different ways of working, or just any kind of issue that can come up when you're like collaboratively working on something. But some of the benefits and the reasons why we kind of developed this training is that it's objective. So the purpose of it is not to put blame on any one party or another. It's not to say that any one way is better than another. You know, I'm not better than you because I like emails, just like someone else isn't better than me because they're really good at like listening to information and retaining it. But that kind of idea that one way is the correct way and one way is the incorrect way can cause a lot of these issues and frictions in the workplace. It also normalizes this communication and makes it inclusive. A lot of times workplaces will look at accommodations as just something for disabled people. But the kind of purpose of this is that it's something that can be applied to everyone, because no matter of whether you have a diagnosis or you don't have a diagnosis, whether you're able-bodied or you're disabled or whatever, you're always going to have a preference for your way of working. So that's why it looks at it from this perspective rather from a like a, what in the UK we would call reasonable adjustments, or like a disability accommodations perspective. It's also accessible. In terms of the information is really easily accessible. It's just there. It's on one page. You saw mine. It's something that I put personally in my email signature. So literally anyone I'm ever talking to can see it. Obviously, it's completely up to you who you share it with and who you don't. But if you do choose to share it with someone, it's then something that they can refer back to, because we can't expect necessarily every single, like a manager, to remember the specific needs and preferences of every single member of their big team. You know, we can't necessarily expect ourselves to remember the preferences of every other person that you work with. So it really helps with having that information very clear, ready to go, that kind of thing. The training itself is rooted in nonviolent communication, which is a something that has been very, very extensively researched. And there's some really cool stuff out there about nonviolent communication if you were to look it up. But it is rooted in like real psychological practices and research. It's clear, it's honest, and crucially, it's simple. Actually, one of the things that I'll share a link to at the end on the screen, like a QR code, but I'll pop it in the chat as well. But one of the things that we're starting at the end of this month, moving into May and June, is a new free global training program that is the kind of sequel to the self-advocacy training, I guess. We're calling it How to Human. And it is designed to teach leaders and teams how to implement the Human Handbook and how to implement self-advocacy speaking principles in their workplace. But our whole goal with this, and like all of the development that's gone into it over the last several months, is that we don't want this to be like another thing to add to people's busy workloads, because a lot of the time when it comes to changing processes or attending training or doing whatever. It's just, we're already so busy. We've already got so much on our plate. It's just like this whole other thing that you have to then do. And a lot of people just don't have time for it. So we've really like put a lot of work into making this an easy win for people, because it can be so impactful and it can be very, very simple to implement. So I definitely recommend signing up for the free information session that we do at the end of the month. We are only doing one information session, so it will be recorded if it doesn't like match up okay with your time zone. But when the proper training sessions start in May, we'll have a variety of different times available. So hopefully wherever you are in the world, we should be able to catch it. I'll pop the link in the chat here if I can find it. There we go. I've also seen some really, really lovely comments coming through while I've been speaking around like some other reasons why people might have preferred ways of working. Like someone said, if you're a night owl, it can be really difficult to communicate in the morning. I absolutely agree. Like I will refuse to schedule any meeting before 10 o'clock because I'm going to be sleepy. Like, let's be honest, I'm going to be really sleepy. You're not going to have the best version of me. My brain isn't going to be switched on. Likewise, I prefer where possible, unless it's like a time zone thing, to not have meetings like between 4 and 6, because again, I'm sleepy. So it's about knowing that and trying to find the compromises where possible. Someone's also said in there that they check in about hours that they're usually active and comfortable with having meetings. And they found out that there was a kind of mutual time frame where everyone felt engaged and alert. And yeah, that's really, really awesome to see. I'm so happy that you were able to do that. And that sounds really awesome. Anyway, moving on. I have my lovely QR codes on the screen for you here. The one on the left will take you to our speaking training. So that is training that already exists. It is 3 one-hour sessions that are available on YouTube, and you can complete fully within your own time. Once you've completed it, you can reach out to us at Safe in Our World. On the link, there's all information about that, to get a certificate of completing the training. But then also you'll get, a whole bunch of resources that look at your like neuroidentity. It will look at sleep health. And then crucially, you'll also get that editable version of the Human Handbook, so you can build your own out. And then the link on the right is our new training that is coming up, that is also completely free of charge. And as many people from your team as want to go can go on it. I would highly recommend at least a couple of people going, because it's really good to be able to like discuss it properly with each other. But that will kind of catch you up on the self-advocacy stuff, but really importantly, look at how you can actually implement this in the workplace to help people advocate for themselves and to help you as a team accommodate for everyone else, basically. I'll leave those up on the screen for a minute, but I'm very happy to start taking questions now if there are any, and I'll take a minute to have a little read through these messages in the chat too. Yeah, I can see someone has said here that their work is flexible but still require people to be ready for meetings at 9 a.m. I think a lot of companies are kind of adopting the core hours policy now, where it's like something in the middle of the day where everyone should be available, but what you do around that is kind of up to you. And that can be really helpful in terms of having those core hours for scheduling meetings, obviously with extenuating circumstances sitting outside of that. But I think that can really help. And as the other person said in the chat, like, that middle of the day period can be really helpful to catch both the people who are early birds and the people who are night owls. Oh, apparently the second link doesn't work. I'll put the actual like proper link in the chat again, which just takes you to the same thing if the QR code is not working. Okay, I can see we have something in the Q&A. In job adverts, how can I best show that our company is pro-neurodiversity and varying physical abilities and attract people with diverse needs? I mean, I think one of the things that you can do, and there might be more kind of like legal almost advice on this depending where you are in the world, but you can have like an inclusive employer statement or something like that. It's called slightly different things depending where you are, but it is essentially a statement that you put at the end of a job posting or at the beginning of a job posting that says, you know, we are an employer who is committed to supporting XYZ, whatever list of protected characteristics or people, and that, you know, we are happy to discuss accommodations. One of the other good things you can do is ask people about their accommodations in the job application rather than waiting until they start work. You can ask if there is anything that you can do to accommodate them at interview, that kind of thing. I think I can think of a couple of resources off the top of my head that I could send to you. So if you want to email hello@safeinourworld.com, I can get those over to you. Otherwise, please feel free to like connect with me on LinkedIn and that kind of thing. But I've just popped Safe in Our World's generic email address in the chat. So if there are specific resources that you're after, I will be able to get those over to you. Someone else has asked, what does it look like to advocate for yourself without burning out, without feeling like you always have to fight or educate others just to be heard? One should have a lot of resources. Usually I'm able to do that for my team, but for myself, barely. Yeah. It can be exhausting. It can be really difficult and really stressful, not only to advocate for yourself, but when you extend that to also trying to advocate for others, it is genuinely something that you can get burnt out from. You're right. And I've certainly been in a similar situation myself. And that is kind of why we've made this new training, because the original self-advocacy speaking training, super important, super useful, obviously. But a lot of times it then puts people in the situation where they are, as it says, advocating for themselves rather than the employer looking at it from a perspective of how can we support you or how can we look at this holistically. So that's kind of why we've got the new training. So, I mean, for a start, I'd certainly recommend engaging with one or the other of those. But that's another one that we have quite a few other resources on our website that might be really useful for you. So if you want to drop us an email or drop me a message on LinkedIn with the question, I can grab. I'd have to just like hop on the website real quick, but we have quite a few different articles and free resources that you can download that kind of talk about that. And when, you know, it looks at like kind of when to say enough's enough, like I am getting burnt out from this, that kind of thing. Someone said, is the confetti button on here more encouraging or more distracting? I think it's nice. It really confused me at first. I kind of wasn't expecting it. I was like, am I doing this? But it's very nice. Thank you. Someone else said, I loved this talk, Sky. I honestly started tearing up because it's so refreshing to hear about this kind of stuff. Thank you. Just wondering what you would recommend when advocating for yourself doesn't get you anywhere. E.g., when you ask for something and it gets denied for various reasons, how do you recommend someone stays motivated after this? I do think, I mean, that's a really good question, and it's a really difficult one to answer because it is very situationally dependent. If there is a specific situation that you wanted to talk through, then again, like, please feel free to drop me an email. But also, as a kind of general question, I would normally say, if there is something that you can do as a team, you know, there is truth to the statement, there's strength in numbers. So maybe if it's going through an employee resource group or talking to a wider team to make sort of a bigger request, that can be a really good first port of call. But then outside of that, I would really recommend having a look at the kind of like labor law and workplace law situations in your own country. I know, for example, in the UK, we have a nonprofit called ACAS that looks specifically at supporting individuals with kind of workplace issues when it comes to like specific accommodations and things being denied. I am sure that there are other countries with very similar resources. But even if you're not inside the UK, the ACAS website has a lot of like very good generalist advice for kind of bringing up specific issues with the employer when it moves more into a like having to go down the making a complaint route, if that makes sense. Someone has asked, what's an unexpected positive experience you've had in regards to accommodation, recognition, or similar? I think, honestly, since making my Human Handbook in 2023 and having it in my email signature, I like at least once every couple of weeks will get someone email me and they'll be like, wow, your Human Handbook is so cool. I hope that I'm communicating with you in a good way. Like someone recently from a different nonprofit actually called Papyrus, who do suicide prevention. We were emailing back and forth about some training. And he was like, I just read your Human Handbook. I hope I'm constructing my emails really well for you. And it was like, they were very clear. They had like subheadings, they had bullet points and stuff like that. So it was clear that he was being really thoughtful about how he kind of gave the information and had actually considered my needs. So I thought that was really lovely. Someone else has asked I've lost it. What are some effective ways that you've learned to advocate yourself without being perceived as difficult or emotional in a male-dominated space? I think that a lot of that, I feel like a lot of my answers are like, do the self-advocacy speaking training, but honestly, you should really do the self-advocacy speaking training because it is like 3 hours that looks at specifically this question. And the facilitator, Lisa, is like absolutely top tier. What a wonderful person. But one of the things that training looks at is around how you make requests of things. So I mentioned a little bit earlier the kind of like, you always do that. I find that really annoying, which is our kind of snap reaction to if someone is, I don't know, like communicating with us in a bad way, like you always bombard me with a million emails and it's that like use of hyperbolic and emotive language that can really cause issues. And it can cause you to be perceived as quote unquote emotional. That's a whole other like issue. But one of the things that the course kind of teaches you is similar to what you saw in my Human Handbook, where I said, I value context, therefore I might ask why. Obviously, it's a bit more complicated than I'm answering it in like a minute here. But it looks at specifically the way that you actually phrase the request that you're making to remove the, not necessarily to like remove the emotion from it, remove the emotiveness from it, I think is a better way to say it, if that makes sense. Someone else has asked, what are the best ways of communicating when a requirement cannot be accommodated due to business constraints? I think, again, this one really depends on the exact situation, but I would always try to present people with options. That Forbes piece that I linked or that I referenced earlier in the presentation actually looks at this and suggests that you give people like 3 options of how you can support them to kind of get the ball rolling. It might be that transforms into like a similar 4th option or something, but if you can't do specifically the thing that they've asked for, it might be that you can do something similar, or like there is a way to find a compromise. I would always advocate about being honest about what the issue is. Like if that issue is that you don't have the budget for whatever it is, I do think, even though a lot of people are kind of hesitant to talk about that kind of stuff, I do think it really helps to be honest and say, you know, there is this other thing that we do have the budget for, or that we can make work that is similar or might work, or, you know, ask the person what are some other things, or what is the core of the issue. Like if they've asked for a specific accommodation, but maybe haven't gone into a massive detail as to why, maybe understanding why they need that or how they need to work will help you reach a different solution, if that makes sense. But in summary, I would say present them with different options and be honest about your reasoning where possible. Someone else here says, How does one advocate for oneself in a situation where leadership isn't exactly the best? The head said that we can talk to her privately and she's open to talk about it, but I do fear approaching her as she has given people cold and curt answers before, and I have been dismissed before about project issues. I think similarly to the previous question that I answered, well, a couple of the questions that I answered, I would say firstly, when it comes to making the ask, try and think about those self-advocacy speaking principles and come at it from a non-emotive standpoint. Come at it from, maybe quite a functional standpoint, or expressing what your need is and then what the request is. But if it gets to that point where you are being retaliated against basically for answering things, that's when I would advocate going down the route of seeking advice from whatever your equivalent of ACAS, the nonprofit, or like whatever your kind of specific labor law situation is when it comes to raising issues in the workplace and that kind of thing. I hope that helps. I'm sorry that with some of these answers, I can't be super specific because they are so situationally dependent. That's another reason why, like, from an HR perspective, teaching people flexibility is something that is so important to me, because you can't just one size fits all a situation when it comes to working with humans. Someone else said, I'm struggling with networking and pitching with autism. I feel like neurotypicals have a secret language or a code that I don't have the key for. This makes me feel disempowered and less capable in front of other professionals, such as sarcasm, boundary setting, understanding cues. Any advice for these short communication types where there isn't enough time to get to know the other person, etc.? A little bit of another one where I say do the self-advocacy speaking training, because it does talk about that kind of thing. But I would also recommend, there's a bunch of resources on our website, so please do drop me an email and I can get those over to you, or I'll try and remember all of these and put the information in the slide deck afterwards and see if I can get that out to you. But generally speaking, we do have a lot of resources around kind of neurodivergent people specifically, confident communication, that kind of thing, how you can look at that. Like, this is both resources for our Level Up partners, but also that are publicly available on our website. We have kind of both. And I think also one of the things that really helps me is just being upfront and honest about who I am. Like, in my Human Handbook, it says, hey, I'm autistic, by the way, which is not always the easiest thing to do in a networking context. And that might be more around choosing where you're networking. But I do think that being kind of upfront and honest about who I am does help a lot. This is also coming from someone who, like, self-professed not very good at networking, pretty terrified of it. One of the things that I found has worked really well for me in networking recently is having kind of an icebreaker. Like, I have my LinkedIn QR code on my phone that is surrounded by pictures of my cats and my tortoise. And I found that that was a really good icebreaker at GDC to kind of like remove the formalities of the situation. I don't know if that would be helpful in any way, but it's something that I have personally found kind of helpful in my last situation of like intense networking. And then the last question that we've got at the moment is, as someone in a wheelchair, I find a lot of people talk straight over my head, and thus I'm kind of outside of the level people tend to speak at when networking. Any advice for how to connect while literally on another level? Firstly, I'm really sorry about that. Not altogether surprised, but very, very sorry. I think a lot of people don't know how to interact with a lot of disabled people. Like, to be quite honest with you, I think a lot of people kind of immediately get kind of scared when they see someone with a disability. And therefore they're not up for, like, they'll like default to what is probably a really unhelpful method of communication because they like don't know what to do. So I would, again, kind of come from the perspective of being open and honest and advocating for yourself where you can. Like, if it is a situation where you feel comfortable to basically say to the person, dude, look at me in my face, please, then I would absolutely do that. I also appreciate that that is not always a situation that will be comfortable for you. I'd say if there is an opportunity for you to have like almost like a buddy system in the workplace, which is what like we at Safe Not World tend to do when we go to events. We try to send at least 2 of us so that we have like that other person who can kind of tag team and support when we're in a meeting situation. And if it is just someone who can role model appropriate communication, that might encourage the other people to follow their lead. But yeah, that's off the top of my head, speaking as someone who is not a wheelchair user, what I would recommend. But it's also something that I think that there are quite a lot of like wheelchair user or physically disabled people within our network that I could look to connect you with if you wanted to talk a little bit more specifically about some of those issues. I also appreciate the person who sent in a question saying, thank you for powering through all of the questions. I haven't looked at the chat the whole time because I was looking at the questions, but thank you for all of the different comments that you've got in there. I will try and take a real quick minute to have a little look through some of these if there are no other questions coming through. But basically just thank you all so much. I will go in the main event chat and drop my LinkedIn link in there if anyone wants to connect with me. And you've also got the hello@safeinourworld.com email address that I put in the chat earlier if you want to reach out for any further issues. But yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate all of you. This is very cool and fun. I'll also move to my thank you slide now because I forgot to do that earlier. Hey, thank you, thank you. All right, I may see you in the event chat briefly, but I am going to hop off now. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your evening or day or whatever time it is for you. Bye.